Welcome to this week's Beyond Bitcoin Hangout. These hangouts are brought to you by the Beyond Bitcoin crew. We encourage everyone to freely share these recordings and to help spread the knowledge and benefits of our DPost 2.0 blockchain technology that we all call BitShares. While listening to this recording, please feel free to visit our website, beyondbitcoin.org, and be sure to stay tuned in for some additional information at the end of the recording. As always, we would like to say thank you, and we appreciate your support. So please continue to vote for our delegate or worker contract so we may continue providing these valuable services to our community members. So once again, welcome, and please enjoy this week's Hangout.
Welcome everybody to another Beyond Bitcoin Hangout. Today is Friday, October 2nd, 2015. We're joined again by the BitShares community and the Beyond Bitcoin community, I guess we can also call it, because the two are very similar right now. And Bytemaster is here from Cryptonomex and working on the BitShares chain. And BitShares 2.0 is coming up hopefully shortly, barring any bad news that might come that coding sometimes can bring out and technology can sometimes show things like that. But he's here to give updates every week and answer community questions. So Bytemaster, would you like to start with your update?
All right. It's been another exciting week as always. This past week, it was rather eventful on the test network. I'd like to thank everyone who has helped test and is testing all the weird corner cases. So as those of you who've been following along may have noticed, the testnet discovered a black swan event that more or less killed the network because that particular black swan event was never supposed to be able to occur. Effectively, we were unable to produce new blocks because every new block failed for the same reason. We got to the bottom of it, have fixed it, and the fix is out there, and there's a unit test for the fix. The other thing we discovered in testing this week was that every account votes for not only who they want to be witnesses, but how many witnesses they want. And if you weren't voting at all, you were voting for the minimum number of witnesses, which means that as soon as everyone imported their balances, if we have the lazy voter turnout that we have today, we'd have the minimum number of witnesses. So we put a very small one-line change in there to make it so that if you don't vote for at least two people, you are deferring to the people who are voting for more than two people on the number of witnesses that you would like. That more or less says that if you wish to abstain, you can abstain, whereas before that change, you couldn't abstain. Those two fixes / hard forks have been included in a new test network that just launched an hour ago. And please join that test network and help discover any issues. That said, the testing in the past week was very, very successful. Attempts to flood the network failed. Well, they succeeded. We were able to flood the network. There were no failures as a result of flooding the network. Margin calls, order matching, forced settlement. It worked when it didn't cause a black swan. So someone tested forced settling. All that worked. The user interface has been advanced in a major way over the past week. There's now the ability to update your account permissions in the user interface. So adding and removing multiple keys for multi-sig, changing your memo key, your owner and active authorities, all that has been added. Creating and issuing assets has been fixed. We've integrated help into the wallet. The help content is a little sparse at the moment, but the framework and architecture is there. So aside from the two issues we discovered this week, I'm still very confident that we've resolved those issues and that we can move forward with the October 13th launch date. So we are a week and a half away from the big upgrade. During this week, we are going to be deploying all the infrastructure necessary. We're going to be working with the exchanges to make sure that they are prepared to stop accepting deposits and withdrawals on October 13th and answer any and all questions they have. Xerox has put together some documentation for the exchanges, and we're reaching out to them if they haven't already reached out to us this week just to make sure. All exchanges have been following the upgrade threads and should be aware of the coming change. It's no big secret. And I'm sure a lot of their customers have been contacting them, asking them questions about the upgrade. I have asked, or will be asking, the various exchanges to make a public statement about their intents to support the upgrade. When in doubt, the safest thing to do is to make sure you control the private keys to your funds on October 13th. And don't wait until October 13th to attempt to withdraw your funds, because we don't know the exact date or time that they will disable accepting new deposits or disable withdrawals. So please take personal responsibility for your funds. Do not expect the exchanges to do something for you. But we're working with them to answer those questions. Making sure that the exchanges have all the support they need is my number one priority this week, in addition to addressing any and all issues associated with deploying the new wallet. So over the course of the next week, there will be a hosted wallet that you'll be able to test on the test network. We will also be releasing a lightweight wallet, which is a downloadable executable, and a full node wallet for the Mac. That is also a downloadable executable. Full node for the Windows is build it yourself at this point, but we'll try to get that out as soon as possible. Our recommendation is that everyone use either the light node or the full node, as that's the most secure option. But the hosted one's probably the most convenient option. I'm working with Valentine this week to make sure that the referral program is in place and that all users can create accounts when they sign up. So that's what we're working on right now. There's going to be no new features in the wallet GUI between now and launch. The only thing we will do is fix small things or disable things that are completely broken at the moment. But we've got a really solid feature set. The wallet feels very snappy. I've been able to import all my balances, including open short positions, adjust all my collateral, place orders, cancel orders, transfer funds, transfer USD with paying the fees in USD. You name it. If you can do it in BitShares 1, you can still do it under Graphene. So that's where we are. After October 13th, we will continue to provide updates probably on a weekly basis at first. We'll have a new release of the GUI as we improve things, refine things, and so forth. We do not expect to do any hard forks after October 13th. So there are lots of things that people would like to see added. Those things will be reviewed and released carefully, because hard forking is a disruption to the entire network. I'm sure the exchanges and everyone has really enjoyed the past 6 months without any hard forks on BitShares. We like to keep a relatively similar pattern of only hard forking to add features about once a quarter. So unless it's a fatal bug, we will not be hard forking. I guess that's all I have on the Graphene launch upgrade. So someone asked a question about MetaExchange block trade. This week, I'll actually be working with block trades to make sure that we have BTC deposit and withdraw functionality ready to go onto the blockchain itself. And with CCEDK being the ultimate backer of that. So we'll go from there.
So for those who are listening who are wondering, the question itself was from Clout. It says, how long will it take to get MetaExchange, block trade, and Transwire into the hosted web wallet so that the BitShares functions like a centralized exchange without requiring users to go to multiple sites to deposit funds? So that was the question. Along those lines, does anybody else have any questions regarding that? So one of them, Thomas, says, speaking of the testnet, we're getting close to release This is the manner of connection, the steps required to connect to the network and produce blocks. Will this change, or is it pretty much set in stone?
The live network will be more or less just like any other test network. The only difference is it'll be for keeps. So the only difference will be you'll have to change which repository you're checking out of. We are going to be forking the code base into the BitShares repository and doing the necessary branding and licensing changes for BitShares at the same time. So you'll be able to see that. So if BitShares 1 can continue, as long as some delegates continue to publish blocks on it, the participation rate will probably fall off a cliff. So the users will see a great big red bar warning low participation, severe network problems, and it will continue in that mode until you can get enough stakeholders to vote in active witnesses on the BitShares 1.0 network. I don't plan to vote for any, but if you want to keep it alive and start a campaign, I'm all for it. But you'll probably need to figure out what to do about the branding and all that. But I'm not going to endorse that.
Speaking of the first witnesses that will be launching, have they been selected as far as how will the initial set of witnesses for the product release be chosen?
It'll work just like the test networks. We will start out with the initial witnesses voted in and a test network set up behind the scenes. And once we're stable and we've got enough servers and enough redundancy and enough division of all those witnesses in place, we will publish the seed node connection, and then we start the election process. We were unable to migrate the votes from BitShares 1, so all new witnesses will have to be voted in. And so we will probably start by adding witnesses rather than voting out the init witnesses until we get enough community members with their witness up that we can start backing off on some of the initial witnesses. We do not intend to run witness nodes long term, just for the transition.
Fox asks here if you can please explain why current delegate votes cannot translate to witness votes. Is it just a matter of you guys wanted to have it reset, or is there an actual reason why it couldn't be another way?
The reason is fundamental architectural difference in how balances and votes are tracked. Under BitShares 1, every balance in the system is separate from your account name, and every balance has its own unique set of votes associated with it. Under BitShares 2, your votes are on the account names, and there are no balances. So it would have dramatically complicated things and delayed release to try to migrate the votes. And there's a lot of stale votes in BitShares 1, so we figured this would be a good opportunity to wipe the slate clean and hold a new election.
Fox is bringing up, I guess it is a pretty decent point, depending on where all of the CNX members are. But he says here, Dan, I know that you want what is best, but the risk is high with CNX being the initial witnesses.
There is a very good argument there. When I say CNX being the initial witnesses, I mean we will select people we know to be the initial witnesses, people who have been active, who are not necessarily CNX employees.
Does that answer your questions, Fox? And does it satisfy everyone else?
I had a question regarding a pull request that Wakao made. He made a pull request for some network infrastructure related to the backbone capabilities of Bytemaster. Has that been considered for inclusion?
Are you talking about the IPv6 upgrades?
I don't think so. I think it has to do with being able to connect to backbone nodes exclusively. It's an API call that will facilitate that. It doesn't require it, but it facilitates that. This would provide the ability for good DDoS protection to hide the witnesses, for the backbone to be able to hide the witness IP addresses.
We have not had a chance to look at any of that, and at this point it's too late to do so. We are still interested in doing that. Someone asked a question about long-range nothing at stake attack with the initial witnesses. nothing at stake is a bogus argument to begin with. What matters most is that there is a public record. And once that public record is out there and enough people have copies of it, you're not going to trust any network. That's basically, when Vitalik posted his article on weak subjectivity, we know by talking to our friends and the merchants which chain they're on. They won't get our transaction if it's not on the right chain, if it doesn't have the right tap hosts on it. So we don't have to worry about the long-range, nothing at stake attack for any of the graphene DPoS chains.
And so, because you said it's a good argument, in which sense is it a good argument then, if it's not in terms of consensus security?
Long-range, nothing at stake says that someone who used to have control over block production can create an alternative chain and then use that alternative chain to isolate some poor victim and get them to think they received money when they did not. If the long-range attack, your account would not exist on their chain because every transaction in the network references a recent block. So if you try to sync up to their chain, your account won't exist over there. Or if it does exist over there, you wouldn't necessarily have control of it. So there's lots of things involved there, but more or less attacks where you isolate the person who's sending the money, those network level infrastructure connectivity attacks it's the type of thing I'd want to spend a lot of time writing a detailed article on to describe. I just haven't thought about the best arguments against it. I have written a blog post about it in the past. So check out my blog for information about that.
Okay, I got that is not a problem for security, but you said that the argument that if Cryptonomex had all the initial witnesses, or if it selects all the initial witnesses, I mean, that is less of a danger, of course, but like in what sense is it problematic? Because you said, right, that's a good argument that it should not be as centralized in the beginning and so on. So in what sense did you say it's a valid argument?
Based on how rapidly we're able to vote in witnesses for the test networks, we can get 30 plus witnesses in less than a day voted in. I'm not concerned about the ability to produce a new network with a diverse set of witnesses. And then we can have a checkpoint that comes out shortly thereafter. And once we have that checkpoint, it doesn't matter what the initial witnesses were anymore, because there's now a checkpoint that includes the new voted in witnesses, and the initial witnesses would be unable to execute a long range attack after a checkpoint.
All right, thanks.
What about the checkpointing feature exactly makes it protected in that way?
The Genesis block is nothing but a checkpoint, if you think about it. A checkpoint is a universally known good state. And if you have a full client and you're downloading a full node, it's going to have that checkpoint, which means it doesn't matter what blocks people give you. If it doesn't line up with that, you're going to reject it. So that's why it protects you.
Makes sense. Fox here says, think of an at-launch risk mitigation for CNX being the only software producer. I mean, that's something that worker proposals are going to get into, right? I mean, we're going to have, eventually our community will be able to hire other developers to help integrate other stuff into it and work on it, right? I mean, that's the plan, isn't it?
Yes, the plan is for anyone who wants to be able to compete. What I think he's saying here is that division of responsibilities. Cryptonomex is producing the software, but by not operating the software, it reduces our liability. We're only liable for software production, which is free speech, and other people are just running nodes. And we don't think that any one of these tasks is particularly large legal risk, right? BitShares 2 is completely designed to minimize the exposure of every individual participant. But legal risks do exist if you put it all under one roof. You know, you create the software, you run the software, you host the software, and you can get money by selling the tokens and all these things. You do all that under one roof, and all of a sudden it starts to, it should probably be fine. But, the way the regulators work and everything, who knows what they'd like to argue. So for self-defense and the spirit of being decentralized, not having all the control in one place, the software is more secure, the system's more secure, the user is better protected when you have division of power. So you don't have to trust us along with the software, because there's lots of independent operators who have, in theory, vetted the software, and that's all part of the process. And a big thing that protects it from regulation is actually that you don't have to trust us. You don't have to trust any one company. And it's the need to trust that the regulators come in and say, well, we need to verify that you're doing the right thing because people are trusting you. So if you engineer it so people don't have to trust you and they can trust themselves, and the system runs itself and it's maintained by itself, then you have the best regulatory protection.
Can I ask a question about worker proposals and the way that works? It's actually just a quick technical question, but then I have another question after that, perhaps. When workers set the parameters to what they're requesting as far as shares and how those shares will be diluted, are they setting in essence a particular date sometime into the future, where on that date all of the shares will become mature and available, or are they setting perhaps like say 100 days, and so every time they receive new shares for that worker proposal on any particular day that they happen to be voted towards the top of the list, that those shares created on that day will then vest 100 days, for example, from that time?
The second thing you said.
Okay, so my next question then is, would it be possible, I guess it would probably be possible, but would it be recommendable, or what would be the positives and negatives of allowing workers to bundle together vested shares in what might be, I guess, a savings bond instrument, let's call it, that would and that they could trade in order to raise immediate funds to fund something in the present, and essentially create I guess you might call like a sovereign bond, where the network itself is the guarantor for the market would look at the trust of the network itself and set a price for a sovereign bond. Do you kind of know where I'm going with this, or?
I see exactly where you're going with that, and that kind of thing is almost possible just by transferring the account of the worker to the person providing the bond, and providing the cash, and then the person providing the cash gives them the shares immediately.
So like an over-the-counter, you might say it's kind of like an over-the-counter transaction. It's still on the network, but you're essentially finding a buyer, similar to the way a bond sale would happen in a country or as a corporation.
Right.
There wouldn't be in other words, there wouldn't be a market where there were bids and asks necessarily, or maybe that would be that, but because the bonds that are bundled together with these vested shares would not be fungible because they all have different maturity dates.
The vesting system is a little bit more robust than that. So they're not a bunch of different bonds, one for each day. They all get added. Each day you're adding to the bond, and you're allowed to withdraw after you've accumulated, say your vesting period is 1 year, 1 coin year. For each coin year you accumulate, you can withdraw 1 coin. So if you've got 365 coins, then each day you can withdraw 1. But after you withdraw, you're accumulating them at a slower rate.
So it's similar to the vested shares from the merger, except you're adding sort of another restriction to it, and that you're in a sense, I don't want to say penalized, but that's kind of what it is. You are incentivized to wait it out the whole period in order to get everything the fastest.
Right. If you keep it all in there, then you're going to get all of it the fast. If you take half of it out, it's going to take you twice as long to get the other half.
But in essence, the concept then of the citizen, well, I'm about to say citizen, so I guess it kind of is a hint to what this ultimately could mean. But the shareholders, particularly referring to BitShares, could appoint more or less trustees, or let's say this is the worker proposal system we have right now. Individuals bid on this ability, and they could essentially raise funds, borrowing on the leverage of the trust in the network. They could sell notes that were promissory notes, and the promissory note would basically be a promise to dilute sometime in the future. And so you could, in essence, the network could borrow in the present and not have to feel the effects of the dilution until sometime in the future.
Well, it's a really complex scenario from an economic perspective, what goes on there. The price in the present is based on how much sell pressure you have in the present. And if someone's was planning to hold for a year and they swap that for a bond so that someone else can sell in the present, you still have selling in the present. It's just you've got a little bit of guaranteed long-term holding there, but it's all going to be discounted with time value money and all those other factors. So there's a lot of things that go into play there.
Yeah, I guess that's the curious element that I'm trying to wrap my mind around is if these would be considered how is the sell pressure of a vested share the same or different as this sell pressure of an actual share that exists in the present? Maybe I'm just not. I haven't quite wrapped my mind around why that would create a similar type of sell pressure.
So let's if we're going to talk about this for such a long period of time, I would like to just make sure that people understand what you're talking about in terms of a bond. A bond, you're talking about being able to lock this away as and now it becomes a tradable instrument that you can.
Yeah, basically we're talking about being able to trade vested shares, being able to transfer vested shares from one user to another.
So I just wanted to bring that, kind of boil it all down. That way everybody can now focus on the background and the focal point, as we've talked about before.
I think I like this mumble session to focus primarily on release-related questions. So to answer your question, on release, you can transfer the accounts that have access to the vested funds. You cannot transfer the vesting account balances directly. It'd be trivial to add an operation to the network to allow you to transfer a vesting account balance. But of course, vested funds are not fungible. Every vesting balance has a different maturity date, and therefore the present value of them is different, and there's no market on the blockchain to support that. But it's entirely possible to transfer accounts that control a vesting balance and to arrange that off network. I'm sure network participants, workers, will use all these things to come up with creative financing strategies. But I leave that for the individual workers to discuss how they want to do it when the time comes.
It certainly is interesting to think about and to hear you saying whether it's going to be possible upon launch, or a question that comes to my mind from that would be, is it something that can be built into the ecosystem where it can be done that way without having to sell my account with the vested balance?
All things are possible in the future, but
okay.
Like I said, right now, you have to transfer your account because there's no operation on the network to transfer ownership of a vested balance.
Sure. So basically what you're getting at is we have the core feature set. It's looking good. Got the help features that are within the wallet now. Everything seems like it's on track. and we can look at that stuff later on. But there, even until that day comes, there is kind of a life hack type of way of getting around it and doing it outside of the network.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. Yeah, I definitely didn't want to hijack the session with the discussion, but you've answered my core question, which is that it is possible. You said all things are possible in the future. So I will bring this discussion to the forums, and I think it's a very interesting topic. So I appreciate you answering. Thank you.
Definitely, I think that it's helpful actually, because I hadn't even thought about it being a possibility that you brought this up. So there's a lot of places where we can all learn, and Bytemaster is one of the best people probably to ask about most of them. So with that said, does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah. So I see October 13th, 2015 as big a day as January 3rd, 2009. I'm wondering if maybe you, Fuzzy, or anybody has any plans to do a mumble or maybe some live streaming, something to say to the world and the media, this is a big deal?
We could definitely look into it. I mean, I've got functionality to have Google Hangouts and things like that, and connect Google Hangouts and Mumble and Skype and Mumble and things like that. So we could do something like that. I wouldn't have a problem with it.
That would be a great idea. We did one for the June 8th announcement, which is a much more minor announcement than this one will be, I believe. So it seems to me that would be very appropriate to get prepared for, and have lots of media here that you've geared up for the infrastructure to provide. That would be a great idea.
I think there's some strategy involved here, right? On October 13th, we are doing major surgery, open heart surgery on BitShares. We're now replacing one core infrastructure for another, and there's a lot of infrastructure that we're trying to roll out on that day. I think we might want to differentiate the day we upgrade the network from the grand opening. If we try to plan all of that stuff on one day, and there's any delay or any issue that's unexpected that pops up, then the whole world spotlight is on us as we're trying to do that. Versus,
good point, very good point.
We get it up and running on the 13th. Everyone migrates, the exchanges upgrade, and once everything's clear and we've checked that all systems are operational, then we have the official grand opening. Hey, everyone, come check it out. It's now ready for business. Versus just being October 13th is just the date that we chose to switch over the core protocol and to start the complex task of getting all the exchanges and general infrastructure up to date. There are still a lot of features that need to be tested and polished. So I would say that October 13th is more like a beta release. It's going to be functional. It's going to be on the new protocol, and it's going to have a lot of benefits immediately from the beta. But the user interfaces, who knows how many bugs we're going to discover as soon as we start throwing 100 users at or 1,000 users at it. We want to make sure that any growing pains we have a chance to work out. And I'm just trying to be realistic here, because we're not launching this, like, we don't have a whole QA team like Apple does. We've got several people here that are actively developing it, and a large community that's finding things. So I guess that's my official stance is let's have the big announcement once the whole community feels that, yes, this is ready for it, and that we can remove the beta tag.
Well, out of curiosity, this is something that I've been thinking as you've been talking about this. We generally see closed betas and then open betas in video game industry, which is where I know more about code and how all the programming and all that stuff ends up working out. So this would, to me, be very similar to moving from the closed beta, where it's just a small group of people, where it's opening up to anybody to be basically a tester, essentially, to submit bugs and all these different things. And generally, open betas there are kind of like little events leading up to it. Now, I don't know if that's how you see it, or if that would be a possibility, or if there's something that I'm missing here.
It's a monumental day, and we can advertise it and get lots of attention on it from the perspective of this is a beta versus from the perspective that this is
definitely
all said and done. This is sort of like, we're doing the first laps around in our new ship before we sail off to cross the Atlantic. Hopefully there'll be no icebergs out there.
I was wrong. To me, these are things that I think early on we might not have thought about, but Bytemaster's obviously learned a lot about all this stuff. So it's kind of funny to see how much more mature and how much more you take into account whenever you're making these decisions, Bytemaster.
All I know is after fighting with the code and bugs and software for the past several years, particularly on BitShares, there's so many unknowns out there that the only real test is length of time in the market. And that's why Bitcoin doesn't change anything, because what they have is proven, and any little change, however stupid it may be, can have unexpected consequences. And we're talking about a major change here. So it would not surprise me if we had to have a few emergency days where we are fixing things and getting the network back up. Kind of like when we initially launched BitShares 1, there was a series of things. We've tried to do lots of test networks. We've got more unit tests than we've ever had before. Every time we found a problem, we've added a new unit test. And we've tested every feature at the protocol level. But there are so many variables that even with all that testing, something like that could happen. And I guess I'd like to use this opportunity to let everyone know that if something happens, your funds are safe, and the network stops producing blocks very quickly if the participation rate falls, and then we can figure out the problem. All exchanges are going to be operating a delayed node, which is a node that doesn't look at the most recent block, but several blocks back. So if something does happen, any short-term forks or whatever, it should not impact the exchanges. We really want to make sure that, the purpose, your funds are secure as long as they're in the public record. And the way the chain is organized, it just keeps marching forward. If there is a problem, it usually stops the chain in its tracks if it's a significant problem. I guess that doesn't sound very good. I'm talking about black swan, unknown issues. We've dealt with them in the past. Your funds are safe. If you have your funds in cold storage, they're safe. You don't have to worry about that. Keep your private keys protected and your funds are secure. But I'm saying all this stuff not because I don't have confidence in the system. I have extreme confidence in the system, or we wouldn't be launching on the 13th. But just so that if it does happen, it's not completely unexpected.
I'd prefer, and I'm pretty sure everybody else would agree with me, a level of honesty on that. I mean, like you said, anything can happen. It's not like you can ever give a 100% guarantee on anything, but there are certain aspects of this, like you said, with if you take the proper precautions, you're going to be relatively safe.
I would say the track record of the team in Blacksburg has been stellar when it comes to dealing with these things as well.
Definitely.
They will get up at 4 a.m. and get to work and take care of these problems and stay there all day until they're fixed. We have a very diligent, people who are on this. So if and when something does occur, that's where I draw my confidence that we have a solid group of people that are going to be right there and taking care of it to the best of their ability.
Definitely. And now, but this topic brings me to one thing that I wanted to bring up with you, Bytemaster, because you brought up a really good point about Bitcoin hasn't changed hardly anything, because it's almost like when you have something stable, my God, you don't want it to become unstable from any little change, and you never know what one small change is going to create a bug somewhere else. Where do you see, like, at what point in time would you say BTS 2.0 is? Can you give, like, at this point in time, what would it be, like 2 years, 3 years, where it would be a safe bet where you can say, this is where I would be comfortable that everything we've built has been vetted and it's withstood the test of time, so to speak?
It's really an individual call. I could look at it and say, well, every single operation type we have has been used at least once. Every single scenario we have has happened. We've clearly handled every case, and I'll feel confident about it. But other people need to be much more conservative. So we're launching an entirely new blockchain. We're calling it BitShares 2.0, but this is an entirely new blockchain infrastructure architecture stuff. So I would say at least 6 months is how long it's going to take until we can be relatively sure that there's not going to be any major surprises on the existing features. But if in the course of the next 6 months we decide after shareholders vote to add a hard fork, well, the clock kind of resets on those new features.
Sure.
So, if you stop changing things and it's operating flawlessly for a long period of time, like 6 months or so, then you can expect it will probably continue. There's a thing with electronics. They tend to die when they first launched, or they last forever. And I'd say that's probably going to be true. Either the blockchain is going to have issues within the first month, or it probably won't have any issues at all.
Yeah, so let's change the word die.
Well, I mean, you talked about these as if everything was only going to happen on the main chain, but if we have a dev chains running simultaneously, I mean, do you think that down the road, perhaps 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, the standard will become to actually run features on the dev chain for a in standard period of time of say 3 to 6 months before they're even considered to be forked into the main chain?
In our research labs here in Blacksburg, we are looking at ways of making the blockchain technology at the core super robust and never changing, and then allowing features to be added without breaking things from a blockchain consensus perspective. So
they're separated in a way almost like more modular.
Yes. So because we've recognized that having anything that can break everything is
bad.
Not good. That creates very fragile systems. And the challenge we have with consensus is anything that affects ownership of tokens does impact everything after it. Because if the ownership of these tokens changes and then those tokens are used in an order, that order is used in the market, guess what? You've now impacted some anonymous person out there and the entire market, and you can't just go back and change things. So that's the challenge we face with these currencies and ownership-based systems, is one change or any change in how ownership is perceived has a butterfly effect. It impacts everything after it.
Now, if you don't mind, I just want to, there's one thread that you posted yourself, Bytemaster, called Arguments Against 100 TPS, which I'm assuming is transactions per second. After reading through this, I've been paying attention to this Bitcoin talk thread, and I'm sure many of you are all here have also been paying attention to it, where someone there is talking about, well, how about this? Rather
Let me
than me
summarize
try to explain it, yeah, I figure you probably will be better at doing that. So let me just shut up and let you do it.
All right. So some relatively smart people have been criticizing our claims of 100,000 transactions per second and throwing some numbers and math on the wall, trying to prove that we don't know what we're talking about. And the problem with that is, particularly when they produce numbers and math and a reasonably logical argument, is they're attacking a straw man. And I wanted to address that, and I addressed that on the forum, but I figure I'll address it here as well so that if someone asks you a question, you'll know how to answer it relatively easily. And the argument that they made is essentially that we keep everything in RAM, and at 100,000 transactions per second, that's a terabyte of RAM per day that we need to add. And that doesn't scale. And I would agree with them that growing your RAM requirements by a terabyte per day is not a viable option. Fortunately, we do not keep all transactions in RAM. All we have to do is keep the state in RAM. And the state is account balances. 99% of all transactions lower one account balance and increase another account balance and result in no net increase in RAM usage. I went on to analyze it from the perspective of if each and every account had an entire kilobyte of data. Now, a kilobyte doesn't seem like much these days, but it's actually quite a bit of data when all you're trying to figure out is, what's their public key, what's their account balance, and so many assets, what are their open orders. Most users' accounts use much less than a kilobyte of data. But if we assume that the average was 1 kilobyte per account, which is a very high average, then we could have all the account information for 1 billion accounts, 1/6 of the world population, in 1 terabyte of RAM. And you can currently buy motherboards on common, from Intel and several other makers that support 2 terabytes of RAM today, which means we can support 2 billion accounts in RAM today. By the time we actually grow to be 2 billion users strong, RAM is not going to be the challenge for us. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that the transaction rate we speak of is based upon the sequential processing bottleneck. Everything else in the system can be done in parallel, which means you can add nodes to the network and divide up processing and routing of transactions and blocks. You can do signature verification in parallel. You can do secondary indexes on account history and market history and anything that would generate a large amount of data. You can do that in parallel using traditional database infrastructure design. But the bottleneck is how fast can you do the things that depend upon each other sequentially. Market operations, transactions that impact the market particularly. And that's the number we're quoting when we're saying 100,000 transactions per second. And there is no getting around sequential dependency of operations, at least not easily, and particularly within a market. In an individual market, every operation affects the order book, and therefore you can't do things in parallel unless you have parallel markets, and then you have spreads and things like that between them.
And a lot more complexity.
Correct. At the end of the day, there's always the option to do multiple parallel chains that are all part of one consensus set. And then, this is sort of the side chains approach. That's how you can scale up. That's parallelism. But you want that's like having multiple cores in a CPU. That only accelerates some tasks. You still want a single core to be as fast as possible, which is why if you're compiling, you don't necessarily, and you only have one thing to compile, you want the fastest possible single core, not a machine with 1,000 cores that are very slow. And that's the difference between, I'm talking about single core speed, CPU bottleneck, which is very different from the entire system performance. From an entire system performance perspective, we probably max out around a couple thousand transactions per second right now. On the test network, we have seen a couple hundred transactions per second push through the test network, which is far in excess of anything that we're likely to be generating. And if we're generating that many transactions per second, the network's going to have lots of fees, and we're going to be a deflationary system, which means we'll be able to fund all the R&D to provide the network infrastructure, to provide better timing, servers that have GPS time synchronization on them, and fiber optic connections to the internet. All those things can happen once we have the need for them to. And the CPU bottleneck will not be a bottleneck at that point in time. Whereas other systems out there, they can add all those other things that we're going to add later, and they're going to have to, but then CPU bottleneck starts to become an issue, and they're going to have to architect their system in such a way to accelerate it. So, all that said, I think it would probably be a good idea for us to refine our marketing, because people don't always understand nuances. They don't understand the significance of what I just said, and people will attack it based upon their own straw man arguments or interpretations of what it is we're saying and claiming. So I guess that's all I have to say there.
There is one final question I think is probably very important to ask that kind of tied in with this. Do you have any minimum requirements for a witness VPS?
I've heard of some witnesses getting away with a 1 gigabyte DigitalOcean node, which is a pretty minimal system requirement. When I'm running the system, I'm seeing it use no more than a couple hundred megabytes of RAM. So, almost any computer should be able to run BitShares 2 at the transaction rates that we have today.
Thank you. Do you have anything else, though, before we close out?
Nothing else. I'm only going to go and restate what I did at the beginning. The rest of this week is dedicated to deployment issues. We are working with CCEDK, talking with the exchanges, and working on deploying the actual infrastructure, forking the code base into the BitShares repository, doing everything we need to do to set up for the release next week. So,
heck yeah.
If you want to participate on the current test network, please participate. Try to find any and all bugs this week that are showstoppers, because we better to find them this week than next week. So we will be having a test wallet that you can sign up with, get some funds, and we will probably be doing several iterations, including if possible, a dry run of the Open Ledger wallet infrastructure. So please help there. Also, if anyone here is in contact with any exchanges, there are so many exchanges out there, please have them contact me if they're having any issues. I've reached out to several of the exchanges, but obviously there are a lot, and I'm assuming that they're watching the forum thread on upgrade announcements and are doing what they need to, and will reach out if they need help. But we have people here, Z-Rock, myself, this week, particularly helping you integrate is our number one priority. So please, if you don't want any at the exchange, have them contact me if I haven't already contacted them.